Hey everybody, CVH here with part 3 of our first impression videos for the Fall of the Dark Brotherhood expansion coming out on April 5th. If you haven't seen part 1 or part 2 of these videos, feel free to check them out on the channel. And this video, like the others, I'll be going over a bunch of cards that have been revealed and previewed by members of the community over the past week or so since part 2, discussing whether or not I think they're competitively viable, what decks I think they might fit in that exist currently, any potential future strategies they might open up, and of course maybe some thoughts in Arena as well. We actually have 8 cards to go over. Quite a few things have been revealed, including a few legendaries. So I'm going to try to keep this video relatively short, but we do have a lot of cards to get through. I'll be going up, we have some comments to start out, then I'll be going all the way leading up to the big impressive legendaries. So without further ado, I've rambled long enough, and we will be starting our first impressions with none other than Skooma Underboss, a 2-drop 2/3 in agility with the effect friendly pilfer abilities are also slay abilities. So for those of you who haven't seen the other videos, slay is a new ability word coming in this expansion, and a slay ability will trigger whenever one of your creatures with slay attacks and destroys one of your opponent's creatures on your turn. So, for example, the 3/4 with Slay +1/+1, whenever it attacks and destroys one of your opponent's creatures, it will gain +1/+1. So Skooma Underboss is relatively interesting. At first glance, I thought it was a 3-drop, and now I know it's obviously a 2-magic card, so that is optimistic as a first thing. Obviously, we have Skilled Blacksmith, is a 2-drop 2/3, and a lot of decks, even that aren't super item-centric, run it just because of its decent stat line. So I think writing this card off immediately as unplayable would be pretty irresponsible. At least we have good stats going for it, at least we know it'll be good in Arena, at least as a 2-drop. One thing I have to say is I'm not sure that a bunch of Pilfer decks that I've seen as of yet, the Pilfer Monk decks in particular, it doesn't seem like attacking creatures is really where they want to be. They are primarily aggressive strategies. And to couple that with something else, we also have the fact that the Pilfer creatures themselves are relatively fragile. Cards like Daring Cutpurse come to mind. They start out small, they grow, or they start out small like a Goblin Skulk, and they remain small with just some utility like that, or a Genie Highwayman. And it's cool that this card allows them to proc their abilities without going face and potentially breaking runes. Obviously, going face isn't always ideal in this game. Sometimes you risk giving your opponent extra cards or a swingy prophecy card. So it's cool that something like that exists. The one situation I could see where that's actually applicable, maybe with Kinral Burglar, defensive drain effect, obviously. And that's cool because obviously sometimes you want to drain, but you don't want to be breaking your opponent's runes. Anyone who's played Pillaging Tribune or Night Shadow knows that. So attacking a enemy creature with a Kinral Burglar and trading instead of going face and draining might be useful, but a lot of the cards besides that are just too small, and even Kinral is rather fragile, and Kinral does allow you to race if you're going face as well. So I'm not sure the effect is exactly where Pilfer decks want to be, but they could obviously, we have only seen maybe close to half of the cards in the Fall of the Dark Brotherhood so far, so here's hoping to give us a Pilfer with an effect that you want to use with this, or just a body that's good at trading, because so far the other early game cards in a Pilfer deck probably wouldn't be the best at doing so. So those are my initial thoughts. Seems like it has potential. Moving on to the next common, Palace Conspirator. So we have a 2-drop 2/2 in intelligence this time. Not quite as good of stats as the Underboss, but the summon effect is where this card shines. We have draw a card, then discard a card. So already we have a pretty useful card. We can get deeper into the deck and discard whatever the least useful card in our hand is. Obviously, if you're top decking and you draw into this card, it's going to be much less effective to cycle you further than a card like Thieves Guild Recruit, because you'll be drawing a card and discarding it immediately. So this does open up some potential cycle opportunities for a control deck. Maybe Control Mage might want to use this card, maybe Merrick Battle Mage want to use this card. I could see this is a totally reasonable card in Arena. There's a lot of times in Arena where you're stuck with very useless cards that you've picked throughout the draft. Maybe they're just underpowered, or maybe they're just your 5th vanilla card in your hand that you want to just get rid of if you can draw something that actually helps you in the situation. So I see this card being, pretty universally good in Arena. Even though its stats aren't necessarily impressive, you'll likely see it a lot because it's a common. I could see this potentially being used in the control decks like I mentioned, and where I really think this card shines is with potential graveyard or discard pile mechanics. So with that said, I think this card has potential, and in order to really evaluate it, we have to start looking at what they have planned for that, such as the next card, Falkreath Defiler. Moving into the rares now with a 4-drop in Endurance, a 3/3 with Slay, so again, you have to attack and destroy one of your opponent's creatures to get this effect. Slay, summon a creature from your discard pile. The first thing to note is that this card does not say random. This is not a Blackworm Necromancer type of effect. When you slay with this card and destroy one of your opponent's creatures through an attack, you choose a creature card in your discard pile and play it to the board. So for starters, I think this card isn't going to be OP or anything. Obviously, it's a very, very powerful effect. Anyone who's played Yu-Gi-Oh! Knows about Monster Reborn, and even Blackworm Necromancer has been nerfed due to the power of simply reanimating something from your graveyard for free, which is what this card does. And I need to stop saying graveyard, it's discard pile. We all should know this by now. So 4-drop 3/3 for starters is not a really good stat line. Obviously, a card that is a 4-drop 3/3 can still be playable. We see that in Deshaun Avenger because of its stickiness. We see that in Murkwater Shaman because of its powerful effect. This card is also relying on its effect. Unfortunately, the Slay effect, the Slay ability, means this card is going to be having to trade with an opponent's card. Chances are it won't be being able to get the best trades with other 4-drops. We've seen like 4-drop 4/5s previewed in this set already. Perhaps other Slay creatures because Slay creatures are typically understated. But the effect, summon a creature from your discard pile. Now late in the game, if you're happening to be able to stick this card somehow, you play it on like turn 8, and it sticks for a turn, you could be getting something very, very powerful. Early in the game, if you're ringing this card out on turn 3, then attacking with it on turn 4, you'll probably not be able to get anything higher than a 3 cost for free if that card was naturally put into the discard pile. But again, we have the Palace Conspirator, which is behind this card. And so on turn 2, or even turn 1 if you want to use the ring on this card, you can draw a card and discard Blood Magic Lord or Odaving. And then all of a sudden, if you're able to stick the Falkreath Defiler on turn 3 with the Ring of Magicka or turn 4 naturally, and get a trade with the card on your next turn, on one of your opponent's creatures, even if this card dies, I believe, like Night Talon Lord, if it trades evenly or if it gets a favorable trade, it just has to attack and destroy a creature. If you're able to do that, you can then sort of cheat into play whatever high-cost creature you discarded with the 2-drop. So yeah, that's a really insane, powerful combo. A lot of people have been already saying, wow, that card could be potentially broken in conjunction with the other card. I don't really think it's worrying. I think that sort of seems to me as a very, very fringe combo. Obviously, it would be insane if you get it off, and I think people will be playing it. And these cards do seem constructed playable at first glance, maybe just not amazing, but I do think these cards could see playing constructed decks. So yeah, that card, that combo actually could actually decide some games at high ladder and maybe tournaments or something. But I don't think it's something to really worry about. It strikes me more as a Dark Harvester first rune in a Desperate Conjuring type of scenario where, yeah, it's going to be really good when it happens, but it's unlikely that it's going to decide enough games for it to be considered broken. But yeah, very, very cool card design. I'm very interested to see in the future upcoming revealed cards what they do more with the discard pile interactions, because I think that's one of the very strong points of this game compared to Hearthstone. You have a lot of discard pile interactions since you can look through the discard, you can look through your opponent's discard. It's cool to see Falkreath Defiler taking advantage of that. So moving on to another card in Endurance and another rare, we have Wrath of Sithis. And I'm not totally sure on the pronunciation. I'm never sure on the pronunciation, but we have a 6-drop 5/6 with summon. Your opponent's cards cost 1 more next turn. So this is really cool card design, and I think when I was talking about it on stream when I first saw the card, I might have underrated it slightly. I think this card could potentially be really sweet in something like a Ramp Scout or Control Spellsword deck against other slow strategies. Obviously, a 6-drop 5/6 with neither guard, charge, or drain is probably not going to be fantastic against straightforward aggro decks, but against other control decks, this could really put them off of their powerful turn. If you time this card correctly, and if you're up against another control deck or another slow deck, you'll be likely to be able to. If you time this card correctly, you can keep them off of their turn 8 Dawn's Wrath, or it's moving to turn 9. If Red Brahmin is the one card that destroys your game plan, just play this card. All of a sudden it costs 10. Sucks for them. If they are planning to string together a huge amount of cards, again, it sucks for them. And what decks want to do that? Potentially the Swindler's Market decks that look to be even better during the Fall of the Dark Brotherhood meta. So if those decks become good, this card becomes a really powerful counter. It happens right on the Smuggler's Hall turn. You can play this to protect your other guys from an Ice Storm. I think this card actually has some pretty cool implications. I'm not going to say it's necessarily going to be in every Endurance deck or something like that, but I do think maybe in a slower mid-range strategy or a control deck, this card could easily find a spot. And I do think I underrated this card just because anything that messes with the Magicka cost of things, whether it's reducing your own things by cheating things into play or simply ramping you, or it's messing with your opponent's cost, such as this or the Hearthstone card Lothab, those cards are typically more powerful than they seem at first glance. And I think this card is one that could sort of have gone under the radar for me, but I do think that this card should be poised to see some amount of constructed play. Obviously, in Arena, it's just a 6-drop 5/6 body that can mess up your opponent's plays, so yeah, I'll take that card. Moving on to, I believe, the one epic we have to review in this video. The Blood Sorceress. So a 1-drop, oh boy, guys. 1 drop 2/1 in intelligence, so Shades of Crown Quartermaster. And the effect at the start of your turn, if you have 7 or more max magicka, deal 5 damage to your opponent. So this is sort of like a Histgrove effect. Histgrove triggers at the start of your turn if you have 15 or more max magicka. Obviously the Sorceress requirements are a little less. So there's no way you're going to stick this on turn 1 and just have it live to 7 max magicka. I mean, I'm sure it could happen once or twice, but it's probably not going to happen. This is a card that I think... yeah, it looks like an aggressive 1-drop that's good just because it has decent stats. 1 drop, 2/1 for Crown Quartermaster, but I just don't really see this as being too viable in the face of the other 1-drops we have, like the Quartermaster. That card, it's never really bad. The dagger is going to be able to help you trade or push face at some point or another. This card's really only comparable at all if it is able to get the effect off, and yeah, the effect is, you know, pretty huge. We mentioned this when we were talking about the Sower of Revenge in the last video, the monthly card. 5 damage is a ton of damage. By the time you're getting that off, it's basically turn 7 if you're not ramping in your aggro deck. You should be having, you know, 7 or more max magicka, which means you have to play this on turn 6 and let it stick a turn, but that doesn't really seem like what you want to be doing on turn 6 or 7. You know, suffice to say, it's not even very likely your 1 drop 2/1 is going to be able to survive a turn no matter when you play it. It's more likely to do so early in the game. If you play it on turn 5 or 6, it's unlikely that this tiny little 1 health Sorceress is going to be able to survive to actually deal that damage. If it were on summon effect, obviously it would be insane, even if it required you to have 7 or more max magicka. That's more damage than a lightning bolt, as I mentioned with the Sower of Revenge. But yeah, I think this card is a pretty cool effect, but unless they release some crazy way to protect it or something, I don't really see this being what the deck wants to be doing. And by the deck, I mean probably an aggro deck. I don't really see... it's not really beefy enough to be played in a lot of mid-range decks, doesn't really trade effectively at all. And in aggro, obviously, you're probably going to be trying to end the game before turn 7 first of all, and you want just more efficient and more guaranteed consistent ways to burst your opponents down if you fail to do so. I don't really think this card would do too much for me there. So that's the epic. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem too great for me. Maybe the least exciting out of all the ones we've talked about so far in this video. And now we have 3 legendaries to round out the video. The first of which... Back to Agility with Astrid. 3 drop 2/3 with Lethal, and when a friendly lethal creature slays, put a completed contract in your hand. So slay obviously means to attack and destroy one of your opponent's creatures on your turn, so whenever a friendly lethal creature does that, you're able to put a completed contract in your hand. The completed contract is the 0-cost Agility action, which gains 1 magicka for the turn. So we've already talked about this a little bit in a previous revealed card, I forget the name exactly, but I do think the completed contracts could potentially be very good for the Swindler's Market decks. I think this card could also see play in that. I'd rather play this than the 3 drop 3/3, because the lethal should allow the deck to clear more, functioning as removal as well. This is a unique legendary, obviously, like all of them, so I don't think you'll be able to, you'll definitely want to be able to play one in the deck. Not really a consistent strategy, but this card just seems, high value if you're looking for something like that. It could be good in something like a Ramp Scout deck, allowing you to cheat out higher cost creatures early. The lethal with 3 drop 2/3, this card is not the easiest to get rid of. Obviously, it will die to execute, but it won't die to Firebolt. That's a big one. It seems like it would trade relatively efficiently early in the game, and, it does count itself for the effect, so, trade efficiently early, get a completed contract, use it to your advantage, whether or not it's a combo with Swindler's Market or just getting something out early. I think this card could be pretty good. Not entirely sure what decks I'd play it in yet, but the Swindler's Market decks seem like a start, and I think it's a fairly good card. And then we move on to one that is not very good at all. Speaker Terenus. I'm just going to take another sip of water while you guys read this card and really think about it and let it soak in and rage with the RNG elements of it. So yeah, as you might have known when I reviewed Heroic Rebirth, not a huge fan of RNG-dependent cards that look like they're going to impact competitive games or tournaments or anything of the sort if the scope is too wide. We talk about good and bad RNG in that video. Check it out if you have not. Fortunately, I think Speaker Terenus is a perfectly designed RNG card. As I mentioned when it was revealed, I was actually lucky enough to guest stream on the stream that it was revealed on, and by that I mean I'm pretty sure it's unplayable. I could be wrong, but I really doubt I'm wrong in this case. I've been wrong before. This doesn't look like one of those times. It's a 10 magicka 6/6. So, we already have a card that's more expensive than Blood Magic Lord and Supreme Atromancer, and if I'm going to play one of those in my deck, it better be at least as good, because we're playing it for more magicka than we would be playing those very powerful cards for. And it's a unique legendary, so, expectations are relatively high. But this card doesn't even have immediate impact, nor does it have the stats to really back up that kind of non-impactful effect. After you play an action, put a random action into your hand. Of course, you can have 0-cost actions already in your hand ready to go, so you drop the Terenus, you drop your completed contract, so the cards you got off Smuggler's Hall or whatever. So what's going to happen when you do that? You get another random action into your hand. This card is an overcosted, infinite Telvanni Arcanist that costs 10 and requires you to have useless cards in your hand that I'm sure you would much rather have played any time earlier in the game. I don't really want to talk about this card too much. It's a huge belligerent giant target, it's a huge jab target, it's a huge silence target. You're probably going to be dead on board if you waste your entire turn 10 playing this card in the first place. If it pops off of a Wawa Jack on turn, I guess 5, sure, that's great if you're able to take advantage of the effect like that. That's probably the only chance this card has of surviving long enough to get any real value. If it were something like the Hearthstone equivalent Archmage Antonidas, I could maybe see it getting additional lightning bolts into your hand or something. That could have been cool. Maybe potentially too good if it cost less and did that. But since it doesn't do that, it's not as consistent and it costs more. I see this card seeing no play, and I would be shocked if I was ever in a situation where I'd want to pick this card in Arena, honestly. So we've just gotta take a deep breath. Gotten that off our chest. Doesn't seem like a good card. We're moving on to the last card of the video. Hopefully it can make up for Speaker Terenus, the Black Dragon. Oh, I'm so happy. 4-drop 5/5. This is much better stats. It's much better than paying 6 more Magicka for a +1/+1 in stats. And wouldn't you know it, the effect actually seems like it has more of an impact. It's not actually an impact on summon, so, obviously it has to make up for it in the stat department, which it does, being a 4-drop 5/5. Obviously even better than the Garnag Orc that we talked about a couple videos ago, or maybe last video, I don't remember exactly. So the first effect that I want to talk about is immune to lethal, and I sort of didn't really touch on this when I was talking about it on stream, but I think this card, that effect on this card is very, very strong, because lethal is one of the main ways you're going to be able to get rid of this early in the game. It doesn't die to Lightning Bolt, guys. It doesn't die to Firebolt, doesn't die to Execute, and it does die, of course, to cards like Edict of Azure and Piercing Javelin, but literally everything except for like Nog, Leave, and Iron Atronach does. So yeah, immune to lethal, Fighters Guild Recruit, Arcane Elite and Arena, anything like that. Not going to get the job done. Pretty fantastic there already, because we see even more lethals like Astrid being introduced in Fall of the Dark Brotherhood. So we have another Slay effect, and Slay this time is discard all copies of the slain creature from the opponent's deck. So the jury is still out on whether this is a buff or a nerf to the card. I think it depends on the situation, depends on what you're playing the Black Dragon in. Obviously, if you're up against a slow deck and you're playing the Black Dragon early, maybe you're playing a mid-range deck, you take a trade or something. Let's say you attack over a Windkeep Spellsword or something like that. Your Control Spellsword or Ramscout opponent probably won't be too sad to see those go. The draw density in their deck, they're going to be able to get closer to their more threatening cards or their board clears or their removal if you're just getting rid of the useless top decks for them. I know I've been playing slow decks, and obviously anyone who has knows the feeling of it being later in the game and you just want an answer or a heal or something like that, and you top deck Windkeep Spellsword or Kvat Shoulder or something like that, and it's just not very good. So the Black Dragon early in the game will probably only be pinging off those less impactful cards, which means it might actually make your opponent's deck slightly better. However, if you buff this card or later in the game are able to attack something a little bit higher value, or maybe, double trade into a Hive Defender, and you're doing the finishing blow with the Black Dragon, so you get to actually get this card's Slay effect and discard all the Hive Defenders, it could be pretty powerful. I don't think that's what makes the card good. I'm pretty sure it's the fact that it's 4-drop 5/5 and immune to lethal. And a lot of people are saying it's broken just because it's a 4-drop 5/5. Now, 4-drop 5/5 is obviously very good, but I'm still not entirely sure why I'd want to play this card. I think mid-range Crusader, mid-range Spellsword, something like that, and a more aggressive deck is probably where I'd want to put it. I'm not sure if it would fit into control decks. It is very efficient at answering the board early, though, so I'm not going to say it's not a fitting role. It doesn't have a fit in those decks. I just don't know if the space is really there, and a lot of them, for example, Hive Defender, Edict of Azure, etc., take up a lot of those slots. If you're playing Mage, you have the lightning bolts and everything. Perhaps it does make it in just because it's so good at trading early game, and if against an aggro deck, you could ping off maybe one of their Orc synergy cards, use it to kill a Bankrai Butcher, and all those are gone now, or a Stone Shard Orc or a Battle Rage Orc. You're just removing reach from your opponent's deck, discarding all your opponent's Cliff Racers, for example. There's definitely some good targets for this card against other aggressive decks if you're playing something like that, or if you're playing a control deck that just wants to remove options later. I do think this card is good just because it can trade early, and if you're playing a mid-rangey strategy, which was where I think I'll probably try this card first, it packs, a hell of a punch, like I said. So yeah, this is also an answer to the monthly card, So Revenge. You can just use your Black Dragon to trade evenly into the 5/5 with guard. Yeah, you take 5 damage, so they got their effect off, but then you don't have to worry about the other copies. as well. So yeah, I like the Black Dragon, and that's where we're going to end the video today. Let me know what you think about this card and all the other ones we've talked about. Definitely some interesting talking points. Let me know if you think I've overrated any, if you think I've underrated any, where you think they'll see play, if you're excited about the expansion so far. I think I'll probably be doing one more of these first impression videos, depending on the rate at which they release cards over the next week or so. But I'll probably be doing one more of these, maybe the day or two before they release the expansion. So look forward to that. Look forward to the expansion itself. Make sure you go in and pre-order it if you have not already. Feel free to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.